Hi, this is Danielle Uchitelle at Gallery Systems, and today we're going to look at some of the new features and functionality of TMS 2018. This release is available to you now on the downloads page of the TMS Communities portal. I'll show you how to navigate to the download in a moment. As today's presentation proceeds, please feel free to ask questions by typing into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, which is probably in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. I'll leave time at the end of the webinar to respond to as many questions as we can. So let's begin. So the first question always is this really released and where can I get it? And the answer is yes, and here. So what I'm showing right now is the TMS Gallery Systems community portal. If you don't have a user account to the portal, please write to support@gallerysystems.com and we will create a user account for you. Once you get in there, there is a lot of material, many resources, and one of the resources is the downloads tab, which I'm showing here, and that arrow is showing the download for TMS 2018. Now, TMS 2018 was actually what the developers call feature complete and what they also call fully blessed, which means it went through the entire quality assurance regression testing cycle, which takes many months. That process was all done in February or March. And the reason we are not having this webinar until a couple of months later is because we wanted to get enough documentation ready so that everyone who wanted to upgrade could upgrade. And we encourage everyone to upgrade. It is a very simple upgrade if you're on TMS 2016 R2 or TMS 2017. The closer you are to this version, the easier the upgrade is. So it's quite an easy upgrade as upgrades go, and I strongly encourage you to do it, both for all the new features that some of which I will show you today, as well as the many hundreds of bug fixes that I'm not going to cover today, but which are in the documentation that I was just speaking of. So if you want to see the documentation for the new features, go to the resources page of the community's Gallery Systems community portal, go to the tab that says new features, and then down at the bottom, you'll see where it says TMS 2018, new features and bug fixes. So that's the complete list. What I'll be showing and talking about today is just a subset of the new features, the subset that I think would be interesting in a fairly short webinar. So where to begin? I'm going to begin with improvements to plugins and utilities. And the first one I'm going to show you is the TMS importer. The reason I'm showing this first is because it's, I think, an important, very important new set of features, and also because just in the interest of covering as much material as possible in the amount of time we have, most of this presentation will be through the PowerPoint, but the TMS importer, you really have to see it. So I'm going to step out of the PowerPoint for a minute and actually demonstrate this. So here is our demonstration. So you can see my desktop, and here's the icon for the TMS importer. I've already logged in, and so it asked me for my username and password, which I've done. Now, if you've used the TMS importer in the past, you know that it really serves a couple of functions. One is that it's for rapid data entry. So you can actually use the importer for data entry in this kind of tabular fashion instead of having to navigate to various places in an object record to create the object record. Or what I think it's used for much more often is to create a spreadsheet of data and then import that spreadsheet to create object records in TMS. And the use cases for that are many. One very common use case is you may be collaborating with another institution on an exhibition, and they lend you 50 objects that you are then going to manage within TMS as part of your exhibition management. You do not want to have to key in the data for all 50 objects. They've given you a spreadsheet with all of the pertinent information, and you should be able to create those records without having to key them in. And that's exactly what this allows you to do. Another thing that the TMS importer allows you to do is to support batch accessioning, where maybe you get, a donation of 100, costumes, let's say, from a collector, and they give you a spreadsheet listing some skeletal information, and you want to create the records fast and then go through and enrich them subsequently. That's another very common use case. And the third use case is sending teams out into the field to collect data, where you would then create object records. That happens very frequently in natural history collections, where you might go out and collect, entomology, insects, come back with 200 of them from your field trip, and have cataloged basic information about them in a spreadsheet, and then want to import all of those records and create object records in TMS. So any of those plus many, many, many other use cases are supported via the TMS importer. The problem in the past with the importer, though, was that it didn't allow you to import very many fields. In fact, there was only about a dozen fields. You could import the object number, department, classification, and a couple other fields. And it did do some rudimentary validation. So the importer would make sure you don't have duplicate object numbers, that your departments are actually departments that exist, that your classification in your spreadsheet is actually a classification that exists. But beyond that, the validation was pretty minimal. Now we've expanded that tremendously. So instead of there being a dozen fields, there are actually 99 fields, and some of them are very useful. The way we built this functionality is that we've been collecting suggestions, feature suggestions from clients for a number of years, and a lot of feature suggestions sort of clustered around the importer. We'd like to import location information. We would like to import valuation, the value of the object when we create the object record. We want to import more than just the creator of the object. We want some donor information as well, and various, many other requests that kind of clustered around this. So we combed through our lists and built that out into this tool, which I will demonstrate. So one thing that it does is, as with the old importer, you can drag and drop. So I have an Excel spreadsheet. I'll just open it very briefly. And I went out into the field and I created, began to flesh out this. I put the object number and department and a few other things. And then I saved it. And now I'm just going to drag it and drop in here. And with the drag and drop, that automatically populated these fields. Now, this is not in TMS yet because there's going to be a validation step. But let's look at this in more detail. So like the old version, with departments, you get a drop-down list that actually connects to your department authority and shows all your departments. Like the old version, similar thing for classification. This is all of my classifications, and yours would list your classifications. But now we launch into the new world of the additional 97 fields. So accession method. This links to your accession method. So this will validate accession methods. And if I was to type in, if I said collected S, it will say, no, you have to choose from the list. This allows you to have tight authority control as you create records. I'll just pick something that actually exists. Same thing for object status. In fact, as we go through, if you look in this top bar, this very top one, I don't know if this will come through in the webinar, but there's light blue here and there's dark blue here. And the light blue and dark blue actually has a meaning, which I'll explain now. So similar thing for object status. I get a drop down of all my object statuses. Let's say this is an accessioned object. And with the rest of the importer, if I have 30 rows here and of accessioned objects, I can right click and go to fill down, and it will fill down all 30 rows for me. So as I said, this is a rapid data input tool. Now we go on to constituent. In the old version, we just had something called maker/artist, which you could rename, but it was basically just one object-related constituent. So like right here, I could say, okay, it's going to click 1 and you can look up. So I'm going to look up, let's see, Smith contains the word Smith. And I have a bunch of Smiths. So this is Huey Lee Smith. And you want to propagate to all cells with the same value. So if I had a whole bunch of rows under this, it would propagate them. And I'll just say no. But here's where this little blue bar on top comes into play, because this is where you determine the role. So I could say all these are artists, or all of these are whatever role I choose. So here's all the object-related constituents, and then a little further down is the acquisition-related constituent, donor, buyer, collector, and then even further down is the X collection-related constituents, previous owner, and whatever X collection-related constituents you have. So using this dark blue dropdown plus the authority of actually linking into your constituent record, you have a tremendous amount of flexibility that you didn't have before. So here I'm saying that these are the 2 artists, but they were all donated by Anna Kisluk, and I could right-click here and say fill down. So all of these will suddenly say they were donated by Anna Kisluk, and I could do constituent 3 and constituent 4 and constituent 5. If you've got more than 5, then you're going to have to go into the record and actually modify it. But we figure by the time you get to constituent 5, you've probably exhausted most of the information you need to capture in this manner. Let's go on here. Title. So in the old version, you just enter the title. So I call this My Great Painting, and I'll call this, you know, My Other Creation. But up here, where it's dark blue, you can choose the title type. And this is a list of all my valid authorities for title type. It's the popular title, it's the primary title, whatever I want. And maybe I could say this particular one has an alternate title called My Alternate Title. And then here in the dark blue band, I can say, okay, that is my popular title, or that is my alternate title, or whatever I want to call it. So again, it's this kind of double aspect of being able to both choose the type and choose the term. With object name is just object name, so you can type in whatever you want. And display date, begin isodate, end isodate, that's all pretty straightforward. So because there's really no authorities around those terms, you just enter them. Some columns here are new. They weren't in the old version, like object display date remarks. That was never there before, and we put it in because people asked for it. Description, credit line was there before. It's there again. Catalog raisonné, portfolio, signed. Many of those were there before. Marks and inscriptions. Now here's a new one. So you can see it's dark blue, so you know this upper band is going to do something. And so I'll say I've got some alternate numbers to manage here. And the alternate numbers I have are the, because you can see this is an authority list, it's the, the acquisition number. I got a bunch of things and they came with acquisition numbers. Who knows what that means, but that's the alternate number. And this is ABC. And maybe this other one is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever I want. And a similar thing for alternate number 2. I also have collected some other information about this object, and maybe it's the component number or the collector's number. So the collector called this C.1, and the collector called this C.111, and you then create the alternate numbers in this way. Culture, period, object type, these all, again, link to your authorities, and my authorities are shown here. Some of these things don't have authorities, like notes. A note is just a note. You just type in what you want. Label text, similar thing. Curatorial remarks, date proof. Again, exhibition history was never there before, and now we added it in published reference and copyright. And these checkboxes have been there for a while. Then we get to some more new fun stuff. Location. So a number of clients said, when we're creating these records, we know where they are going to live. Why should we have to go into the object record after creating it and then assign a location? And we thought that makes sense. So here you get a drop down from your location authority. And I would say the only thing which perhaps in the next version we might show better is that this is a flattened list, and it is nice to see the locations hierarchically the way they're shown within TMS proper. Nevertheless, you can go in here, and if you find that 100, accessioned items are going into temporary processing room 1, then you just pick that and then right-click and go to fill down, and all those locations will be filled down, and you're good to go. Similar thing for location date, because you'll want to know not simply the location, but when that location date gets assigned, so you have control over that. And then on to valuation, and we got a lot of requests for this. So I bought this for $100. It was $100 for each one of these things. So I'm going to say this is my purchase price. The value is $100, and the currency is US dollars, or whatever I want. And then this is going to make a valuation record for this object. Similar thing down here. I could say, the appraisal price. I don't have a purchase price. The appraisal price is 111 euros, or whatever it is. I'll just say dollars. And then the stated date, because you have to have a date with the purchase price. And if there's an exchange rate and you want to calculate it, you can put that in, an exchange rate date. So you don't have to enter all of those fields, but if you have the data, you're certainly likely to want to do that. So that's exchange rate 1, and it's all 1 and 2. So you can actually create 2 of these at once. Beyond 2, you probably should go into TMS and enter them within TMS proper. Let's continue. The magic is not over yet. Text entry. So as you know, text types are something that you control. And here, because you can see it's dark blue, I can immediately create text data within text types. So here's all my text types. And let's say when I'm creating this record, I have some catalog copy. So I can type in my catalog copy here. But in addition, I also have a text type called historical note or scope note, whatever I choose. And it's whatever I decide to type here. And I can do text entry 3 as well. So 1, 2, and 3. And you can pick 3 text entries. Beyond 3, you should go into TMS proper and enter that yourself. But this certainly will get you a long way down the road. Then field value, just as text entry 1, text entry 2, and text entry 3 will link into your user-created text types, these will link into your user-created flex fields. So I have a number of object flex fields. I have some flex field groups, one group for deaccessioning, another group for web content approval, and then I have some ungrouped flex fields. And I have security rating as an ungrouped flex field. So once I choose, in this example, security group, I have already set up as a flex field where the only valid values are low, medium, and high. So this has to be one of them. And then I can put a date here, and the same thing for field value 2 and field value 3. So you can populate up to 3 of your custom flex fields in this manner. Again, think rapid data entry. Similar thing, or along the same principles for attributes. So attributes link to your thesaurus, and they link to your thesaurus attribute types. So here's a list of all my attribute types. Maybe I have an attribute type called subject. And then once I choose that type, thesaurus, that's xref type, I guess it's called technically, attribute type, then here I'm going to get a drop-down box that links to all of my subject attributes, which is a link I set up within configuration of TMS. And I can choose any one of these or simply enter invalid text. And if I enter text that isn't one of these lists, I'll get an error message saying you entered an invalid subject because it has to be something in your subject attributes. Then same thing for attribute 2, attribute 3, attribute 4. let's see how long this goes, 5, 6, 7, 8. You've got lots of flexibility here to enter up to 8 different thesaurus attributes for this object. Moving on to geography, there's no blue. This is light blue, which means that all of the magic happens in this row. So here's a link to all my geography types. Okay, this is the place collected. It's collected in wherever. This is the place that it was depicted. So it's art object that depicts, the War of 1812, Battle of New Orleans. So I could enter the information here. And then once you know that this row has collected and this row has depicted, you then key in the continent, city, and whatever else you want. And that's all just standard functionality of the geography control within TMS, except here you can do it very quickly in a grid. Let's go on a little bit further. Short text 1, short text 2, short text 3. What that all links to is the object context or OBJ context. So as many of you may know, there are a lot of user definable fields that predate the whole concept of FlexFields, where there was many dozens of fields in TMS that you can rename and use any way you like. And the place where they show up is in user designed forms. So these fields are grouped by the type, by the data type of the field. So for short text, my OBJ context or object context, I've renamed one limiting illuminance, and I've renamed one temperature, and a couple of them I just didn't bother to rename at all, and they still are named short text 1, short text 2, and short text 3. But once I choose that, then I can enter a value to push into that OBJ context field. And the same thing for short text 2 and short text 3 and short text 4 and 5. And then a different data type, long text, which, as you can imagine, just allows you to put in a whole lot more text. So here's all my long text fields, many of which I renamed. I renamed one keyword search. I renamed another packing requirements. And then you can put in your data. So if I say what's going to follow in this column below is the packing requirements. These are the packing requirements. And then you type in whatever. So that is for long text 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then finally, last but not least, site link and event link. So as you know, objects can be linked to a site and objects can be linked to an event. And if you already know which sites and or events this object links to, why not put it in right here? And this again is something that was very much desired by the natural history users of TMS, but it has applicability for others as well. So if you go out to the field and do a field, a field study where you're collecting insects at a particular state park, then the site would be the state park. And you can see all of your sites here. So here's all my sites. I don't have that many of them, but here's the Angel Island State Park where I did this collection event. And the event is this, whatever event record you've already created. So you cannot call an event record into being here. You got to go into the events module to do that. But once you've done that, you can create the link right here. Here's the, can't see it all, but here's the actual collecting event that happened in this place. So that's the 99 column importer. And then when I am ready to import, I say import and it will do that. Or it will say you made a mistake in this particular column and you go back to it and fix it. Just a couple of other things here. It used to be that if you wanted to create a template, you had to go into TMS and then export some data. And by exporting it, and there was a special list view called export for import. And that special list view mirrored the columns that you need for the import. But we've made it a little easier here. Now you don't need to go into TMS, just go up to File and go to Create Excel Template. And I'm going to do that right now. And then that created a blank template that has all the columns because, with 99 columns, it's easy to get lost. So here is all 99 columns, starting with object object number and ending with event, as we just showed, and you just populate the ones you need to populate. So it just makes life a little bit easier for you. So that is the new and improved importer. Additionally, I'm going to minimize this and go back to my PowerPoint. Hold on. So additionally, as I said in the beginning, even though this was feature complete and quality assurance blessed in late winter, early spring, we want to make sure that we release these new features with all the documentation you need to use them. Otherwise, we're just hoping that you can guess how to use it, and we don't want that. So writing documentation is a big part of creating software, and sometimes I know that we have not always done as thorough a job of releasing new features along with the new feature functionality documentation, and we're trying to address that now by making sure the documentation for these new things is really complete. So just showing you a screenshot. The developers who worked on this project also did just amazing documentation that will be, set a high standard for documentation going forward, and they really did a good job. And you can go onto the community's website and download that. I'll show you in a minute, but you can see it's almost 40 pages of documentation just on what I showed you. But then there is a lot to say, so we didn't want to release new features to you without explaining everything. So that's what this did. And that takes some time, and that's why there's this sort of time gap between the blessing and the actual release, and the webinar that I'm giving now showing the new features, which is kind of the coming out ceremony for the new build. And here is a screenshot, again, of the community's website showing the resources tab and a little arrow showing the documentation called Using TMS 28 Importer Tool, and that will call up this very lovely documentation. So let's move on, because I spent almost a half hour just on this feature, and this is why I can't cover everything, but I do want to show you some more highlights. So another highlight for TMS 2018 is changes to the media loader, another plugin. And the media loader has been around for a long time. It's a way, just as the TMS importer is a way of rapidly creating object records, the TMS media loader is a way of rapidly ingesting media information and creating media records and linking those media records within TMS. And that has actually grown in prominence over the last couple of years as we released the web application TMS Media Studio. So Media Studio is the digital asset management system that runs alongside of TMS in a browser. There's a couple of webinars that you can go and look at that, but people who use that sometimes find themselves in the position of having to do a lot of rapid media information capture, and the media loader becomes very important for that purpose. But some of the earlier adopters of TMS Media Studio said, the media loader is great as far as it goes, but it only allows us to ingest media records and link them to objects. As you know, you can link a media record to a constituent, or to a loan, or to an event, or to various other places within TMS, and they wanted to be able to do that. So that was the nature of the improvement to the media loader. That now, and this is just a screenshot from the media loader, I won't show you the whole media loader because that could be, and I think was, a webinar in and of itself. But what's new is this drop down that shows the module/context. So when you import the media records, it doesn't just link them to objects. You could link them to rights and reproductions, which is actually a context within objects, or to loans, or to exhibitions, or constituents, or bibliography. So that was the change that we made for some clients who made the very good case and use case for expanding the functionality to link to additional contexts. Let's go on to some of the other new features out of the plugins and back into TMS. One change that we made was an improved way of updating legacy media fields, just sort of staying on the topic of media. So I have to show you two kind of side-by-side screenshots to explain this. And don't worry if these screenshots look a little bit small on your screen. I just had to get them both in the same view. But it's basically a view of a media record. So in the upper left-hand corner, you can see this tab called File Info. And in the lower right-hand corner, there's a different tab of the same record called Metadata. And File Info, just when you create a media record, it captures some of the structural information like the pixel height and width, and the memory size and color depth, and a few other things are captured right at that moment. The metadata is relatively new, within the last 5 or 6 years, new feature within TMS where when you add a media record, TMS will suck out all of the structural metadata within that file. So everything from, the camera type to the focal length of the lens to, if you have it turned on your camera, the geocoding information and the encoding type. And, if there's copyright information embedded within the media file, that will all be, it will all be read and indexed and searchable within TMS. And because we were doing that, our initial thought was, well, image height and image width is fundamental metadata information in essentially every image media file. And it's true that we did import that kind of in a legacy fashion in File Info, but now that we have it here, the thought was, okay, if we, and now here you can see these two little arrows chasing each other. If we have a case where the user wants to refresh their metadata, and there are many use cases for that, like maybe your photography studio does some color correction, they open this file in Photoshop, they do some things, they do some other things, somebody crops it, something changes, and then you want to refresh the metadata. It's very easy to do. You click those two arrows and the metadata refreshes. But the problem was that legacy File Info pixel height and width did not change. So you have a disconnect where you could conceivably have a new and accurate metadata image height and width, but an old and now inaccurate pixel height and pixel width in the image info. Now, this new feature, when you click that refresh button, both of those fields will be refreshed. And that was really a big relief for people who designed crystal reports or just are comfortable and familiar with using that first tab for File Info and seeing the pixel height and width and making sure that everything is consistent throughout and that there's no discord between the information. So now they both refresh. And speaking of media, there is now additional functional security to control media drag and drop. Now, I have to say, I initially pushed back against this request in a nice way, which came from a number of clients, often very large clients, and they were saying, we don't want to use media drag and drop. Now, I thought, and I still do think, that media drag and drop is one of the greatest inventions of all time. And if you are a TMS user of sufficient years that you remember the old way of doing it, where you had to make many, many clicks to navigate to a file, and then many other clicks to link that file to an object record within TMS, you should be thrilled, and I was thrilled and still am thrilled, that you can now accomplish all of that with a drag and drop. But we do have a couple of clients who said, we don't want people to use drag and drop. It introduces a host of problems. We have people doing too much dragging and dropping. The interns, we don't want the interns to do drag and drop. We want the conservators and the collection care people to do it, but not this other group of people. So they made a case, a very believable case, for creating some functional security that would allow you to prevent drag and drop. So here, if you just look up, and what I'm showing is a screenshot from the configuration screen. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that this is the security group called Curator. And here I do allow the curators to do drag and drop. But I might have another security group called interns, and I have 500 interns linked to that. And I may choose not to let them do drag and drop. So I think that really is a very, very believable use case, and we wanted to implement it, and so we did that here through configuration. Again, staying with media for just a moment longer, we now have support for media drag and drop for mapped drive variations. So this will take a little explaining, so please bear with me. I actually have a little story that goes with this. So, old scenario. Joan's workstation has a Q drive, and a mapped drive simply means your drive is associated with a letter. It's the X drive, it's the Z drive, the Q drive, whatever it happens to be. And every environment can map the drives differently for every user, potentially. You probably have some shared drives where you're all mapped to the same drive, everybody in your collection, in your museum, in your Windows domain, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's very easy to map a drive where in my scenario, Joan's Q drive is mapped to this place and Sarah's X drive is mapped to the same place. And maybe Sarah doesn't have a Q drive and Joan doesn't have an X drive. So in the old way of doing things within TMS, if both of these map drives are not entered in the media path authority, then during media drag and drop, TMS can't interpret the Q drive and the X drive as being the same thing. And because of that, you would get some different behaviors where maybe the Q drive was in the media paths authority, but the X drive wasn't. So when Joan did a drag and drop, it behaved exactly as she expected. But when Sarah did it, it didn't behave as she expected because TMS doesn't know what the X drive means. And that was the problem. So now, new functionality. Joan's workstation has a Q drive. Sarah's workstation has an X drive. They both map to the same thing. TMS is now smart enough to know that the Q drive and the X drive are both essentially the same thing. So they will both be treated the same way, and drag and drop or ingesting records, adding media from either of those will both end up having the same behavior. So that was the fix for these map drives. Another big area is FlexFields just about everywhere. So FlexFields came in a couple of years ago, and they're user-definable fields with user-choosable data types. They could be text, they could be date, they could be yes, no, Boolean checkbox, and they're very useful to extend the functionality of TMS in places where there are not sufficient native fields for you to address your workflow. We have now put them in even more places. They started out, as so many features do in TMS, in the objects module, and then they spread out as clients came to us and presented additional use cases to have them elsewhere. So here's a few of the new places. I won't show you all, but here's a few of them. So FlexFields are now added to sites. And one of the things that was useful for me in preparing for this webinar is I talked to my colleagues here at Gallery Systems, and we have people who have expertise in natural history and fine arts and archives and many, many other areas. And sometimes I was not able to think of a good use case right away, but the people in subject areas where this really comes into play immediately had lots of good reasons and examples of how they would use it. And this is one thing. So this is a site record. Sites records are very important to natural history, important to others as well, but super important to the natural history people. And a couple of use cases that came up immediately was, sort of descriptive elements having to do with the site. Does it have wheelchair access? Is there interpretive signage? When is the prime visitation season? And many, many other things that I didn't put into my screenshot here, but lots of good ways you could use FlexFields in sites. FlexFields in events, and these are really FlexFields in the event object link. So you can see I'm in an event record. That kind of orangish tab that says object is objects linked to this event. And then that arrow is pointing to the FlexFields linked to the event object. So the best use case, and I'm sure that many of you can think of much better ones, but the one that was presented to me is you may have objects associated with the event and you want to know if they were on display or not. There's an association between the object and the event, but did it actually sort of get handled, get looked at, become a part of the event itself? So that's one way you could use FlexFields, or any other way you want. That's the beauty of FlexFields. And in the Geography Assistant. So Geography Assistant is where you can put geographic information, not only about objects, but about other things. And here the example given was a FlexField group having to do with geocoding validation. So geocoding here is the latitude and longitude. It's becoming more and more important because everyone wants websites that link into maps that show little push pin markers where the objects are represented. And there's lots of good ways that you could use this latitude and longitude, and more collections are capturing this information, but there's some workflows around validating latitude and longitude. So here in my made up example, I said, okay, here's the workflow around geocoding validation. Somebody's confirming the latitude and longitude because it's easy to get them wrong. It's just a number. Somebody's confirming that it renders correctly in Google Maps because maybe this is linked to eMuseum where you want to display a Google map. And somebody is setting the waypoint icon. So this is all part of your workflow. Again, I'm just showing one of a virtually infinite number of ways that you could use FlexFields here in the Geography Assistant. Another place that FlexFields now appear is in the Bibliography module. So here is, this is a bibliographic record for a particular book. And I just said, well, is it available as an ebook, and is it available in the gift shop? You may track that, or many other things, or anything else you think is worth tracking. But the point is the FlexFields are now there for you. Sticking with FlexFields for another moment, FlexField groups are now available in user-designed forms. So for those of you who use user-designed forms, and many do, you will probably know that you used to not be able to put grouped FlexFields. These FlexFields where either there are multiple FlexFields within the group, or they model workflow, as in the example I gave before with this kind of validation project for the geocoding. Now you can link in the FlexField groups. You can drag and drop the FlexField group, and you can tell this is a FlexField group if you look over there on the right where it says Design Palette. There's a little blue plus sign next to deaccessioning approvals, and that is a FlexField group. That plus sign indicates that. So now your form will have whatever fields are within that FlexField group. And I know this is taking up valuable time, but I just have to take a little side trip about FlexField groups because we're talking about it and this comes up a lot. So the side trip is changing the name of a FlexField group. If you've used FlexField group, you know that they come in to being with a little 3-letter prefix, which is usually FFG, which stands for FlexField group. That's modifiable in configurations. So you can change it to say XYZ or whatever you want, or you could say the full words FlexField group, but left to the default, it says FFG. And if you have to spend a lot of your time explaining to your users what FFG means, you might wish that you could just strip off the FFG. And there's a way to do that, which I'll show you very quickly right now. You just go into database configuration, go to tables and columns, and then within the tables and columns, the FlexField groups will all show up. And you can see here that I have renamed FFG deaccessioning approvals to simply say deaccessioning approvals. So that's just a little thing in case you're in case you feel burdened by having that FFG there, you can relabel that. The only caveat is that if you relabel it, the next thing that I'm going to show you will not be as useful. So let me show you the next thing. And the next thing is FlexFields display context information to prevent ambiguity in queries. So let's walk through a little setting the stage here. So I'm showing 2 screenshots from the FlexField creation screens. These are object FlexField groups. So I have two FlexField groups. They're both about workflow. One is the workflow around deaccessioning approvals, and one of my steps in the deaccessioning approval process is approved by director. The director has to weigh in on this. And I have another FlexField group, which is workflow around web content approval, something completely different with different people who are involved, except the director is involved in both. The director also does approvals for the web content approval. So you have two FlexField groups that are very different with different uses, but they both have a field called approved by director. Now before, when you were in either advanced query or here the query assistant, it was impossible to tell the difference between the two because they both said approved by director. But now you can see that you can tell the difference because one says approved by director, FFG, deaccession approvals. The other says approved by director, FFG, web content approvals. So it's very easy from the point we are right now to run a query and find all the objects that the director has approved or has yet to approve for web content. And the same thing for deaccession without getting these two mixed up. Still staying on the topic of FlexFields, I guess we did a lot of work on FlexFields in this build. The ability to change the order of FlexField groups. This was a frequently requested functional improvement. So this is the screen for creating a FlexField group. Again, I'm in the object context here. And you can see over to the right that you have an up and down arrow where you can reorder those, and that's new. Over to the left, you can see that that's a new arrow. You can reorder the entire FlexField groups themselves. So when you create, in this case, an object record, and you want the FlexField groups themselves to be in a particular order, you now have control over that. Previously, it was just in the order you created them. And what has existed since the beginning is you could always reorder the fields within a FlexField group for the dependencies, depending on the workflow, which makes sense. So now you have much more capability to do fine-tuning of the order of things within the FlexField dependencies, the FlexField group, and the FlexFields within the group. And just transitioning as FlexFields is a stepping stone to additional functionality, maintenance is now available within configuration, including FlexField maintenance. So if you've done a lot of administration within TMS, you know if you want to create FlexFields or change a department or set an authority or set a location authority or any other authority, you first got to go into a record. So if I wanted to change, to create some FlexFields, I had to go into an object record within TMS. Even if I didn't want to, even if I had no interest in any object, I just wanted to do some work on FlexFields, I had to launch TMS and then go into the authorities. Now, and there's a picture of how you do it. You're in an object record and you go to maintenance. And in this case, I just had to find any old one object record, and then I'm free to change any of the authorities that I have the right to change. Now, all of that can still be accomplished in TMS. So we didn't take anything away. But in addition, all of those things have been copied over into the configuration menus as well. And the reason we did this is because there are many TMS administrators who have a lot of work to do that doesn't necessarily require actually launching TMS. They want to do these configuration settings within the configuration application. So in this case, I have FlexFields, and I also have general authorities. And here under the general authorities, I have locations and roles and departments and all the other wonderful things that you used to have to go into TMS to do, you can now do in configurations. In addition to making it so you didn't have to launch TMS if you didn't want to, another very powerful argument for doing this is that people who have the web applications like TMS collections, where you're really doing all of your collection management within the browser, but some of the administrative functionality needs to be done outside of the browser in this environment. This allows you to do that kind of configuration without having to open TMS or even have TMS. So one very powerful, compelling argument for our doing this feature was that people who are using the web applications and not using TMS at all to manage their collections can now have a place where they can set all of their configurations without having to have TMS installed on any desktop. More new things. Sites module now linked to the events module. Again, I can say this is probably something that a very vivid and powerful argument was made by the natural history people, but there are many, many other uses for this as well. So here you can see I'm in an event record, and events and objects have always been linked. You can see the object tab for object-related events. But now you can see a new tab for event-related sites and objects linked to that site, which are linked to this event. And if that sounds complicated, we'll probably have a whole separate webinar just on that. I know the natural history people will get it instantaneously because they're the ones who really implored us to add this functionality. So it's the object site, objects related to sites related to events now can be created. The link can be created, and that's what this indicates. There is also new functionality for security rights to reset the rights within a security group. So let's talk about that. So this is a screenshot from previous versions, i.e. TMS 2017 and prior, where when you create a new security group, you can say, okay, I want this new security group to have no rights, full rights, view only, or a copy of whichever one you happen to be viewing right now. Or if you look right below where it says new, you could rename. But once the group was created, there wasn't much you could do with it other than going in and fine-tuning each individual field that could be viewed or not viewed, could be edited or not edited, could be deleted or not deleted. But what we were seeing was sometimes people have, here's an example. Let's say you have 13 users linked to a group, and you're making some changes, you make some more changes, you make some more changes. Pretty soon you've made some more changes that it's just not at all the way you want it anymore, and you can't go back and rechange it because you've just made too many changes. You want to entirely reset that group. Under this old way, your only choice was basically to delete the group and start over. If you delete the group and start over, that means you have to add those 13 users again, and you have to remember who they were, and then you have to remember, then you have to go forward and set the different rights for the different fields within TMS, and that was time consuming. Now, we have added a reset feature. So if you just get so deeply wrong in changes that you've made to a particular group that you don't want to delete the group, you just want to reset it. This allows you to do it, and you can reset to no rights, full rights, or just view only rights, and then take it from there. So that, I hope, people will consider a safety net so that they can go in and feel more comfortable exploring the different rights that you can set within security groups, and not have to worry about, oh, I've gotten so deeply into it that I have to delete the group and then remember who to add and then add them and then change it again. So this will give you a bit of a safety net for that functionality. And just about ready to end here. I know I've gone quite long and have not entirely scratched the surface, which I hope indicates there's a lot of wonderful things in this TMS 2018, many more than I can cover in an hour. But I do want to cover this. It's a simple thing, but very often the simple things are the most well-loved within new features for TMS. So simple find loan and find exhibition query. We have always had this in the objects module. You go in to do a query, there's a choice called find object, and find object calls up this very useful field input screen where you can enter the object number or the title or the object name or the constituents, and there's a little drop of 3 buttons that will get you into the constituent query control. And relatively newly added, that top drop down where you can choose an individual department right here. That's fairly recent, and it's very useful and people love it. And we were asked, well, it's you only have this in objects. We want it in other modules as well, so that's what we did. So now in the exhibitions module, there's a similar thing. So you can go in and there's a new choice under query called find exhibition. And the screen is similar, but slightly different. Instead of object number, you have exhibition title, because people usually know their objects by their object number or accession number, and they usually know their exhibitions by the exhibition title. So this allows you to pick the exhibition title or the constituent or a loan linked to that exhibition, which is very useful, or the exhibition begin and end date. And a similar thing in the loans module, a new radio button there for find loan, and like the screen I just showed, but a little bit different. Loans are usually not known by their name like an exhibition is. It's usually known by its number, like an object is, so you can put in the loan number, the loan type, incoming, outgoing, loan status, approved, denied, whatever the status is, as well as a linked exhibition to that loan. So if you want to find all of the loans linked to the exhibition called seats, then you could type that in and find all of those. So it's a small, relatively small thing. Did not take a huge amount of programming time or a huge amount of quality assurance testing, but I think this is going to be very useful. And copy connex refs to entire record selection. Connex refs are constituent cross-references. We, a couple of years ago, at the request of users, added the ability to right-click on an attribute, on a thesaurus attribute within a record, and copy that across an entire record set, or delete it across a record set. And after putting that out in a build, I think it was TMS 2016, many users came back and said, that's wonderful. Now we would like to do the same thing with constituents. And the use case for this is very powerful. So under the old way of doing things, if I add, let's say I have a lot accession, I create, however I may do it, I create 25 records of various artists, and they were all donated by Fred Klein. So before, you had to go into all 25 records, go into acquisition-related constituents, go into the constituent assistant, choose the role as donor, many, many clicks. Now, there's a right-click function called copy to entire selection. So if my record set has those, 12 records, let's say, or I can choose copy to entire selection, but there is a little bit of nuance here. First, you get a warning message or just a notification message. You're about to copy this constituent, this role, the role is donor, the role type is acquisition related, to this entire record set of 9 or 8 or 9 other records. Do you want to do it? And let's say you say yes. Then a little test will be performed within that record set, and TMS may come back and say, you know what, Fred Klein is already linked to some of these records. Do you want to link Fred Klein a second time as a donor? Or do you want to just skip linking him a second time as a donor? Now, Fred Klein could be linked as an artist. That doesn't matter. What it's really looking at here is, as a donor, he is already in some of these records. And you could say skip or add again. So I think in most cases, people will say skip. For whatever reason, I went into one of these 9 records and I had added him and I forgot he was there, or I just added him in the record set. I don't want to add him twice. The add again option here is for some specific scenarios, and the most frequently occurring one is fractional gifts. So some people track fractional donations by listing the donor as many times as they contribute to the fractional ownership. So if Fred Klein donates 25% ownership in each of 4 years, he would have 4 donor records. And so you'd want to add them multiple times. I know not everyone does it that way, but some people do it that way. And we wanted to support both approaches and both workflows. So that's why it asks you this question, whether you want to skip or add again. So that's, it's been an hour and the time has flown by. I urge you to look at the documentation that shows all of the new features, and I'm going to show it again. I know the screen is small, but just to give you an idea that the download, once again, is under the Downloads tab. And the new feature and bug fix list, which kind of fed this webinar, is under Resources. And before I look at a couple of questions, and I can see there's a lot more questions than I can probably answer in the amount of time, but I'll look at it and see what I can answer. But one thing that gets asked a lot at this stage, where we're just releasing a new version, is, am I going to be the first person on TMS 2018? How many other clients are on TMS 2018? And I'm happy to tell you that quite a number of clients are on TMS 2018 already. And the way that comes about is because we host, Gallery Systems hosts about 120 or so clients where we do all of the IT infrastructure, and they connect to TMS in our data center, our secure data center, and we manage the SQL servers and the web servers and everything else. So we have about 100 clients or so who do that. And one of the things that we do for free for hosted clients is we will upgrade you after asking, but usually clients say, yes, I'd love to be upgraded. So we upgrade those clients early on in the process because we don't need to give them documentation on how to do the upgrade since we do it ourselves. So we can get them live early. And there's a couple of dozen who are live with TMS 2018 in that manner, or they just came on board with Gallery Systems since February, and we put them live with the new version because we want everyone to have the latest and greatest version. So you would not be the first, or even in the even I wouldn't even call it early adopter at this point. There are many of your colleagues who have been using TMS 2018 for some time now, and it's great. And I urge you to upgrade. If you need help upgrading, we can provide help. We can, if you want to hire Gallery Systems to do the upgrade, send me an email and we'll talk about it. Otherwise, download the documentation and it will tell you how to do it. So that's all we have time to look at now. Let me just do a quick check. Let me go here to show my email address. And see, people are already making good suggestions because improvement never stops. And we've been improving TMS for 30 years. And the very first thing was, can you freeze columns while scrolling to the right? Because there's so many columns, you might not know which object number you're actually looking at. That is a great suggestion. I think that would not be difficult to implement. It's not in the functionality right now, but I will definitely add that to the request list. Can we delete just watch? Batch updating of FlexFields. Okay, someone else asked about batch updating of FlexFields. That functionality has been built into the web applications. So if you're running Media Studio, Conservation Studio, or TMS Collections, you can batch update FlexFields, and that's amazingly useful functionality. So I can do a webinar on that. That's extremely useful. All right, well, you know my email address. You can just write to Danielle at gallerysystems.com. And for those of you that I did not get to answering your question, I contact everyone directly with answers, so no worries. For everyone else, if you're not on TMS 2018 already, I urge you to look at TMS 2018 and read the documentation. And if you need assistance or a boost into that version, to contact us and we will give you help. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar.